So thank you very much for the invitation. I already had three very interesting chats with some of your colleagues. Yeah, I've been a math professor for 15 years, and since October, I'm a professor of ecology and evolution at École Normale Supérieure. It's a talk about coupling the evolution of genomes and species, and especially about models of speciation. And so there's too many things in this presentation, but I will try to skip what appears to me as not useful today. Yeah, so my group is called SMILE, for Stochastic Models for the Inference of Life Evolution. It's an interdisciplinary group, which is straddling École Normale Supérieure and Collège de France. Our let's say our objectives are to conceive models, predict patterns, and infer processes from these models. And we have several different topics that we are interested in, all in evolutionary biology, some also in ecology and epidemiology, and we also have some papers in math problems inspired by all these topics. And so I want to start with what is called the phylogenetic approach to diversification, which is and has been a very popular approach, which goal is to infer how the rates of speciation and extinction depend upon several types of variables like time, lineage, diversity, so number of co-occurring species, the age of a species, and especially the trait like let's say body mass or body size of the species. And we have been contributing to this topic through collaborations with some of the European specialists of it, like Hélène Morlon, Rampal Etienne, or Tania Stadler. You see on the right like four examples of review papers that have tried to review the methodology and the results of this approach. And the approach is actually a very simple approach based on a phylogeny. So you take a phylogeny such as the phylogeny of mammals that you see on the right, and assume that you have a certain model of diversification, which actually treats species as particles that may give birth or die. And you want to compute the probability of this likelihood under the model, where the birth and death rates may depend upon the variables that I cited previously. The problems that we have with this approach is that there are many statistical problems. Two of the main ones are false positive associations and problems of identifiability that were tackled or displayed in the papers that are cited here. But the main questions that are the main, let's say, shortcoming of this approach that I can see are the following two, which are not statistical. The first one is the fact that species are not particles, so they don't give instantaneously birth. So the first question that I would like to ask is whether we can model what is inside the species box to understand the process of speciation rather than seeing them as particles that can split instantaneously. And the second question is whether we have got enough data with phylogenies to infer the diversification process, or whether we should use additional signal, either from fossils or from genomes. And here we'll take a point of view of taking additional signal from genomes to infer macroevolutionary processes. So here's the outline. There's two parts to this talk. The first part is about opening the species box, and the second part is about coupling models of speciation with models of molecular evolution. So the first argument is that it's based on the fact that species are made of elementary constituents, populations, individuals, genomes that conspire to impede or promote speciation. The fact that speciation takes time, and the fact that conversely to many models that are used in modeling, but also in methodologies, in statistical methodologies, assume that genetic differentiation is shaped by species divergence, by the diversification of species, whereas in reality, of course, it's the contrary. And the second part is about models that acknowledge the fact that speciation takes place in a spatially dynamic context, that gene flow is continuous, it's not just one event that occurs at some point in time, and can be an important cause of gene tree disagreement. And a third point is I think, an underappreciated point, the idea that if, as we know, gene lineages, as you can trace them backwards in time, separate from let's say the present day genome with recombination, and also visit different species because of gene flow between species. You have to imagine that actually the ancestral lineages to one single genome explore different species in the past, have explored different species, and so there's no such thing as an ancestral species to any given species, but there's many ancestral species at any given point in time. And so I think this is something that has to be properly thought. So let's go with the first first part. The first part is about models of speciation, which is actually the title that I gave to the talk. So we spent majority of the time on that part, and maybe just browse through the second part. So this first part deals with three different models. A model where speciation occurs by going through different stages. Another model where speciation is really the byproduct of the accumulation of mutations, and we explicitly model mutations. And the third model where we explicitly model the interbreeding relationship between individuals or between populations, and we model how this relationship evolves through time. So the first model, so let's say all these models actually are based or meant to be to come from the bottom to the top, to be based on the description of individuals or populations. And so now, as I said, we forget the fact that or we drop this idea that species are particles, and we really open the species box. And now the elementary particles of the system are not species any longer, but they are either individuals or populations. And of course, also these individuals and populations undergo birth-death mutation processes, where replication or birth is, if you think of populations as these particles, the colonization of a new habitat. Death is local extinction of a population, and mutation, I would think of mutation as a major genetic or phenotypic change, which will be taken as a new stage in the speciation process. And so what we want to do here is to think of speciation as the consequence of this differentiation, either at the gene or the phenotype level. So forget that maybe about ABCD here, but the idea is to that we want to see how these microscopic models make predictions at the macroscopic level in terms of species phylogeny, in terms of species abundance distributions, in terms of speciation and extinction rates, etc. So the first model is a model called the protracted speciation model, which is actually differentiation by stages. And so the idea is actually due to James Rosindell and Rampal Etienne, and relies on this well-known fact that speciation is not instantaneous and takes time. And so in this setting, species are ensembles of populations, and these populations gradually diverge from the mother species. And to model this, we assume that each population accumulates mutations, accumulates steps in the speciation process, and speciation is complete after a population has accumulated k of these steps. Okay, so we call a newborn particle, which is actually a population that has colonized a new habitat, it starts in the stage incipient. So it's actually in the same species as the mother population, the same, and it's in the stage 1, say, okay? And it will arrive in stage good after K steps, which is making a new species. And what we want to do is to imagine that we have this diversification process of populations, and in each species, which is actually a cloud of populations, we want to sample one population, one individual in each species, and make predictions on the phylogeny, which is given by this sample. Okay. And so what we maybe I won't enter the details here, but the idea is that, or the interesting fact is that there's no straightforward way of defining a phylogeny in this setting. Okay, so if you have this idea that you want to make prediction on, let's say, microscopic models where new species arise through mutations or through, let's say, differentiating from their mother population or their mother species, you will soon be, let's say, confronted to this problem that there's no straightforward way, there's no single way of constructing a phylogeny from a random sample. But we have chosen one way that seemed natural, and proved that for this way of defining the phylogeny, we could make predictions on the phylogeny which are quite interesting, meaning that the phylogeny in this model is given by what is called the coalescent point process. So I won't enter the details, but it is really a nice object which is different from the coalescent in population genetics, or the standard coalescent or the Kingman coalescent, which is mainly the coalescent in models where the population size remains constant through time. Here, the coalescent point process is the coalescent in a birth-death process. Okay. Here we have something which is more complex than the birth-death process, but the phylogeny is still the same coalescent as in a birth-death process. And so what we've done in this paper is to prove on simulations that we could infer not each individual parameter. So what are the parameters in this model? Basically, the probability of seeding a new population, of colonizing a new habitat from a single population, the probability of transitioning from one step or from one stage to the other. And so we are not able to infer any individual parameter accurately, but what we can do is to infer a composite to the parameter, which is the duration of speciation. What's the duration of speciation in this setting is the waiting time before in your genealogy of populations, there's the first descending root population. Okay? And so what we've done here is to use the bird phylogeny that you see on the right, break that into 46 clades, and infer the duration of speciation on each of these clades. And on the left, the bottom left, you see the histogram that we obtained thanks to this estimation, and you see that the duration of speciation ranges from so the x-axis is expressed in millions of years, and so 0 is 1 million years, and so it goes from 10,000 years to 10 million years. So that's for the protracted speciation model. And then what we wanted to do is to be a little more precise about our way of modeling the way individual populations or individuals go through these stages. And instead of saying that your stage is really the stage of a population is really inherent to that population, we wanted to take into account the fact that it's not a property which is inherent to one lineage, but it's really the distance between lineages that makes the speciation occur or not occur. And so here's a paper that we wrote on, let's say, theoretical considerations on how to make a phylogeny from a birth-death mutation model. And so here, we go quickly through this slide. In this paper, what we've done is to review all the models that were used in simulations to simulate speciation from microscopic considerations. And so the idea in these models most of the time is to assume that mutations occur throughout the phylogeny, and that these particles, you may think of the leaves of the tree on the right as individuals or as populations, but anyway, you want to look at the distance between any two leaves in this tree. And so the idea is that you have a threshold Q, and when particles are separated by less than Q mutations, you put them in the same species. And the second rule is that when separated by more than Q mutations, you put them in different species. Of course, you can also think that actually the threshold is not the same for rule 1 and rule 2. And so what I said actually in the previous slide is more general, is the fact that there's no species partition that is let's say straightforward from these two rules. And in particular, even if you can do that, the species partition will not be monophyletic. And so here what we found, what we discovered in this paper is that of course if species form monophyletic subsets, there is one unique phylogeny that you can obtain by collapsing each subset, each species into one tip. But if it's not the case, you have this proposition that there's always one single species partition that is the finest monophyletic partition satisfying rule 1, and the converse, which is that there is a unique species partition that is the coarsest monophyletic partition satisfying rule 2. Because of course, a very simple partition that satisfies rule 1 is to put every individual, every particle to put all particles together in one single species. And a standard way of satisfying rule 2 is to put every particle in a different species. And so, of course, you don't want to do that. And what is stated in this proposition is a way of quantifying the most natural way of let's say, drawing phylogeny from a genealogy and mutations where the species partition satisfies one of these two rules. And so in the following work that I will show, we have used the first way of constructing a species partition which is monophyletic, and we have called this way of constructing a species partition which is monophyletic a model of speciation by genetic differentiation. So the idea is that you take Q equals 1, for example, and so you want that all individuals that are clonal with respect to this mutational process are in the same species, and you want to partition all your individuals or populations into a species in such a way that the partition is monophyletic. And so we apply this rule 1, and so here's the result. It's stated here. You assume that the genealogy is given by a birth-death process with mutations, and we generate the phylogeny according to the rule I just described. And we have shown that actually we could simulate directly the phylogeny by simulating a very simple three-type time inhomogeneous branching process. And so we could do tests on these phylogenies generated by pure birth-death process at the level of individuals plus mutations that tell you when an important phenotypic change let's say differentiates individuals and make them into different species. And we used a very simple pinning algorithm, including the case of missing species, to infer the parameters of the model, which are theta and b minus d, the rate at which the genealogy, or let's say the population of individuals grows. And this population of individuals which grow is progressively broken into smaller subsets as speciation occurs. Okay, and so forget about the figure on the left. What is important is the figure on the right, which tells you that you have very well behaved likelihood landscapes, which allowed us to estimate the values of the, let's say, the mutational target rate, which drives speciation, and the rate at which grows the underlying population. We did that for various cetacean families, and then what we did, I'm not showing here this in this slide, but what we did is then to simulate phylogenies thanks to the algorithm that is explained here. Don't pay attention. We simulated phylogenies with parameters given by the values estimated from real phylogenies, and we obtained phylogenies that were very realistic in the sense that they reproduced well-known statistics or well-known observables of phylogenies, and mainly the statistics, for those of you who know beta and gamma, that characterize the balance or imbalance of the phylogeny on the one hand, and the repartition distribution of nodes either closer to the tips or closer to the root for the second statistic. And then in the third model, we wanted to be a little bit more accurate again, and really take into account and bookkeep the information on the ability to interbreed between individuals or populations. If you think of the previous model called the speciation with genetic speciation from genetic differentiation, SGD, the idea is that if you figure out all these populations forming species, or let's say populations that are not interacting with each other, you may imagine that you will draw an edge between two of these populations if they are able to interbreed. Okay, and so in the previous work, what we did is to say that there is an edge between two populations if they are separated by less than 2 differences. And this separation is given by the genealogy and the mutation. Okay, so maybe now we will just forget about the genealogy and how it interacts with the distance between populations or between individuals, and just draw an edge between particles. Okay, again, think of individuals or populations that are able to interbreed. Okay. And so the minimal assumption for such a model is just to assume that interbreeding evolves by split and by drift. So what do I mean by split and by drift? By split, I mean that, okay, these populations undergo some birth-death process, where populations go locally extinct, and they also split into new populations. That's at such an event, your graph of interbreeding relationship will evolve, and also by drift, which is just the fact that this ability to interbreed spontaneously vanishes with time as populations accumulate differences without modeling explicitly these differences in the setting. And so what was very important for us at this stage was to realize that the interbreeding relationship is not transitive. Okay, it's not transitive. What does it mean? It means that if A can interbreed with B and B can interbreed with C, doesn't mean that A and C will interbreed. Okay? Actually, it's even a consequence of this picture where interbreeding evolves by split and drift, it's a consequence of this process that the relationship is not transitive. Of course, a famous example is the ring species, where each of these ecomorphs that you see here on the right panel, each of the ecomorphs derive from a single ancestor, which lives at the northern side of the Sierra Nevada, and any pair of adjacent ecomorphs can interbreed, but the two ecomorphs that lie at the southern side of the Sierra cannot interbreed. So you have a graph here. Your split and drift graph, or your interbreeding graph, is given by a cyclic graph with no edge at the bottom of the cycle. Okay, and so here what's nice is that also it really gives you a quantitative way of representing the biological species concept, where groups, where species are groups of individuals or populations that can interbreed and are separated from other such groups. It's really exactly this network that is underlying this definition. Actually, the species are what you can think of the connected components of this graph. If you have never encountered this word connected component, just imagine that you have a graph. Maybe I can show one. So here you have a graph where the vertices are the populations, and there's an edge between two vertices when they can interbreed, and you can see that these big chunks here are the connected components. Okay, they are connected by edges, but they're disconnected to the other connected components. So the biological species concept tells you that the connected components of this graph are the species. And so what we've done is to devise a very simple model for this evolution of the graph. So you assume that you have n populations, so you have a fixed number of populations, exactly as in Hubble's neutral model of diversification. You have extinction recolonization in the sense that if you want to keep the number of populations constant, you have at rate, so it's okay, 1/2 per oriented pair AB. So AB is a pair of populations. B disappears, and A gives rise to a new population, a new colony. And the rule is that because the population that was just seeded, A prime, that was just seeded by population A, is assumed to be clonal to A. Of course, A and A prime do interbreed, and so they are related in this graph. And also, all the populations with which A can interbreed are also related to A prime. Okay? A prime can also interbreed with them. And the other, so this is for a split, and drift tells you that each edge disappears after some random time, which is exponential with parameter r for mathematical convenience. And what we've done is to compute, or let's say, study the stationary state of this graph. Okay, so if you let this graph evolve through time, you will soon realize that it has a stationary state. Stationary meaning not a deterministically stationary state, but a random stationary state. And so as in all studies in graph theory, you may be interested in the size of connected components, or in the probability that two populations taken at random can or cannot interbreed, etc. Okay. So remember that there are just two parameters. N is the metapopulation capacity, the number of populations, and R is the rate of evolution of reproductive isolation. Okay, so the larger R and the quicker the edges will disappear, and the more species you will get in the metapopulation. Okay. So yeah, so that was just a slide on mathematical methods. Let's skip that one. Yeah, maybe skip that one. Okay, and just look at the result that we got. So you can do simulations. So here you have n equals 1,000. So you have 1,000 populations. You take R equals 50, and here's a snapshot of what you get at stationarity. And what we were able to prove is that when n is large and R is large, but R over n is small, we have, okay, forget about the details, but we can prove that the degree of a node, which is the number of populations with which one population can interbreed, is of the order of n over R. And the number of connected components, number of species in this graph, in this metapopulation, is of the order of R. Okay, so you have quite precise predictions. There are further predictions that that we could make. We could study the distribution of sizes of connected components, which gives you the species abundance distribution. We can also study the phylogeny, because here in this model there is, contrary to what I said in other individual-based models, here there is one single way of defining the phylogeny, which makes it quite attractive. What is the speciation event here? Speciation event is when you have one connected component, which is composed of, let's say, for example, two big chunks, and these chunks are only related by one edge. Okay, and once this edge disappears, you have speciation event, and of course the difficulty is that the new species carry a lot of memory of the process that has been going on in the past. Okay, the structure, the very structure of the interbreeding graph in these two populations, these two metapopulations. And so here you see various simulation for various values of R, and still with n equals 1,000. Okay, so you see as R grows from 5 to 347, you see that you have more species, and the number of species is basically of the order of R, and the degree of a single node taken at random is of the order of n divided by R. Okay, but I think that this model is quite rich in terms of predictions, and still understudied. Of course, the problem is that it was published in a math journal, so it has remained largely hidden from the biological literature. So I have a second part, which is about co-evolving genomes and species. I can just like paintbrush the models and results that we got in this setting. So why am I interested in this coevolution between genomes and species? Because one of the things that is, say, the objects that we studied in the beginning are the phylogenies, and the phylogenies, as you know, in reality are inferred from gene trees. That's what they are called, molecular. That's why they are called molecular phylogenies. And so the idea is that the gene trees can be inferred by comparative approaches, by comparing sequences. And here you have, let's say, a toy tree, a toy species tree, ABC. Some gene trees have the same topology as the species tree, which is most of the time the unknown, as in this picture. Some may not, as the orange gene here. And so the question that I already asked in the beginning of this talk is whether we can exploit the signal coming from the diversity of gene trees, rather than taking this diversity as a nuisance and a thing that you want to eliminate to find one single species phylogeny. Just to make a very simple point, deep coalescences, as you see here on this example, can be due to the intrinsic randomness of the coalescent process. The fact that here in this internal branch of the species phylogeny, the two lineages ancestral to this to the loci sampled here may not coalesce in the whole edge, and then they are back in the mother, the ancestral species co-occurring with this lineage, and so any of the three coalescences can occur at first. And so here you see that the coalescent event which is inconsistent with the species tree occurred first. Okay, so that's called incomplete lineage sorting. And shallower coalescences than expected are due to gene flow between species, as you see here. Gene flow between species is can seem like contrary to the biological species concept, but as I'm sure most of you know, it is a phenomenon that has been increasingly documented in the last decade, and so it's important if you want to model the coevolution between genomes and species to take this phenomenon into account. Of course, the coupling between gene trees and species tree already exists. There's one very famous example, and very famous, let's say, gold standard known as the multi-species coalescence. So in the multi-species coalescence paradigm, you start from the species tree, which is assumed to be fixed or given by a birth-death process. And most of the time, it's the unknown that you want to infer from gene trees. And conditional on the species tree, gene trees are independent coalescence constrained to reside within the species tree with occasional gene flow events. And so there's no explicit modeling of physical linkage or recombination. They are all independent conditional on the species tree. And so the disagreements among gene trees are mainly due to the randomness of the coalescence process. And so they say the gene trees give no information about the diversification process. Okay, all the signal on diversification is contained in one summary tree. So what I want to show is how we can, on the contrary, take into account the signal coming from the diversity of gene trees rather than summarizing them into one single summary tree. So I wanted to show you this model with dynamic spatial structure, but I will be very quick because again, it's one of the papers that has strong biological basis, but is really mostly a mathematical work. The idea is that we want to think of speciation occurring in a dynamic context, in a spatially dynamic context, sorry. And what we've done is really let's say to characterize the population genetics of such a spatially dynamic context. We assume that we have let's say we are in the context of peripatric speciation, where we have one mother population surrounded by peripheral isolates, and because speciation takes time over a time scale which is much larger than population dynamics, we can't think of this distribution through a space as static, and we want to think of it as dynamic. And so, yeah, I forgot this slide. Okay, it's here. So we assume that we have this large mother population in blue and small peripheral isolates in red. The main population is of size n fixed, and it's surrounded by a stochastic number of small colonies which contain a number of individuals which is much smaller than n. It's size epsilon times n. We have, of course, if you want to do a population genetics in this setting, there are birth deaths occurring within populations at rate 1, simultaneously one birth and one death to let the population remain constant. And we want this metapopulation to be dynamic, as I said previously. And so here, the small colonies will emerge from colonization events and disappear by merging with the main population. So here, don't pay attention to the math. It's really a way of parameterizing this model. So you have this, here you have one guy which sees a new small population. The rate at which it occurs depends on whether it comes from the main population or a small colony. And fusion is when a small colony merges with the main population, and the rate here may depend on the total number of small colonies in a way that may be density dependent when alpha is larger than 1. and tells you that so of course when alpha equals 1, there's no dependence on this number, but when alpha is larger than 1, it tells you that you will have more fusion events when there are too many small colonies. And so, okay, and so what we could prove is that as the size of the population in the mother colony goes to infinity, and epsilon, the ratio of sizes in the main population and the small population goes to 0, we could prove that so epsilon times c, which is this ratio times the number of populations, converges to some deterministic process x, which is the solution to a differential equation. And so, and this x converges as t now goes to infinity to some equilibrium. And so here, forget about the math, but here the idea is that at equilibrium you have the same order of magnitude of biomass of individuals, which is in the main population and in the small colonies. You have an equilibrium between the ratio of the two, but of course the equilibrium is dynamic in the sense that the sizes remain constant, but there is constant inflow and outflow in and from the main population. Okay, and so if you think now in terms of the genealogy, you can have several things that happen inside the main population. You will have, so assume here that we have sampled these green lineages here, 3 in the main population and 2 in the peripheral isolates. Because these sizes are too small, you will never sample individuals in the same colony. And so there's never going to be more than one ancestral lineage to your sample in any small colony, but you can have several in the large population. And so you can have coalescences in this large population, and you can have traveling in and out the large population because of fusion and fission events. And what we could prove is that actually everything happens as if you have lineages that are inside the main population and lineages that are out of the main population. So you have inner lineages and outer lineages. And so what happens is that each pair of lineages that are inner lineages can coalesce at rate 1 per pair. And now any lineage can change type out, in and out, according to some specific rates which are mentioned here. Okay, and so basically this spatially dynamic context boils down, to a coalescent, which is very simple, a coalescent with 2 states, state blue and state red, where state red can become blue, state blue can become red, and it's only blue lineages that can coalesce. Okay, so we have a spatially dynamic model where small populations bud from and merge with the main population. When you look at the coalescent of this model, it's a very simple 2-state coalescent. And the perspective that we have is to embed this in a speciation framework where each species consists in such a cloud, one main population surrounded by colonies. But still, we are still not clear about how to let's say, model speciation in this context. So just a word about the fact that this active-inactive coalescent also arises in models of seed banks, where lineages can be dormant or active, exactly as in our setting, and it's only the active lineages that can coalesce. I will just take 10 minutes to the 10 remaining minutes to try to explain the last 2 models. So there is one model with an explicit gene flow between species, where here we really wanted to model explicitly how genomes accumulate mutations and how these mutations, this divergence, feeds back on the gene flow between populations. Finally, let's say turning populations into different species because they have accumulated too many mutations. So you have this, let's say, it's two sides of the same coin, which is the accumulation of genetic differentiation, which increases through mutations, but also feedbacks on gene flow. And of course, gene flow, as gene flow ceases, new species arise. So yeah, so here you have to imagine that you have in each population you have one single genome. So or that mutations are so slow and that all events occur on such a slow scale that you can always assume that each population is monomorphic. Okay. So the notion that we use here is the notion of co-adaptation. The new allele that occurs, so we work under the infinite allele model. The new allele that occurs on a locus will assume to be co-adapted with all the alleles present at other loci of the same genome at that time, but are not co-adapted with all the other alleles present in other populations. Okay. So again, there's here a graph which is hidden, a network, which bookkeeps the relation of co-adaptation between lineages in different populations. Okay, so you see here on the right panel, you see how populations replicate. That's colonization events, mutations that accumulate, that the black dots, and you have these gene flow events that you see on the bottom side of the figure. So populations replicate. Each population is subject to genetic drift. And the important thing is that populations exchange genes. So you have gene flow between populations with a probability which is given by, let's say, co-adaptation. So if you want to introgress a gene inside the target population, this introgression will be accepted with a probability which is given by the degree of co-adaptation with this gene, with the target genome. Okay. And so you see that if you have, let's say, you can imagine that you have passed a threshold in terms of loss of co-adaptation between genomes, you will forbid gene flow. And since you forbid gene flow, you forbid the production of similarity between populations. And so at some point, you can imagine that there will be some kind of snowball effect where no gene is ever allowed inside this new population, and then accumulation will accelerate until all loci in two populations carry non-co-adapted alleles. Okay, so that's a quite simple but model. It has some degree of complexity, but I think that this degree of complexity is really at the level of the complexity of the phenomenon such as speciation. Here we have some very simplifying assumptions, like in the multispecies coalescent, everything is neutral and there's no explicit modeling of physical linkage. But you have explicit modeling of the progressive loss of co-adaptation, giving you a model coupling gene trees together and with the progressive emergence of reproductive isolation. Of course, the problem with this model is that it's prohibitively slow for simulation and especially for inference. And what we've done in this paper here, well, not in this paper, but in this paper, we'll skip that one, is to devise a backward model. Okay, so we have a backward model for this forward model, still using the notion of co-adaptation, but between lineages that are sampled at the present. I won't enter the detail. We again have 4 parameters that tune the time scale of gene flow, the speed of reproductive isolation, the degree of polymorphism, and the number of populations exchanging genes. And with these 4 parameters, I think we can deal with a variety of, let's say, of situations. This new model is coalescent based, so it's fast to simulate. It's actually plastic. You can make it more complex if you want by incorporating time in homogeneity or gene-specific rates. It is sampling consistent. One feature which is quite important in biology, sampling consistent means that if you look at the genealogy of n+1 genes and you take one gene away from this sample, then what you get is something that has the same distribution as a sample of n gene. Okay. Now forget about the math here, but the fact is that actually if you look at the past of one single genome, there's a striking similarity with the Moran model, which allows us to make some computations. For example, the number of ancestral species to n genes, as I told you in the beginning of the talk, at any given point in time, you have several species that are ancestral to a given genome. And so if a genome contains n loci, the number of ancestral species at stationarity is of the order of log n, which is quite satisfying since it increases very slowly with n. We have used data sets to see if we were able to compute, to infer, sorry, the parameters of this model. We have used one set of gene trees for finches and for bears, which are known to have exchanged gene flow in the past. We have shown in this, by using ABC methods on the distribution of pairwise distances between gene trees, that the likelihood surface is very well behaved, as you see on the right, for our model, the gene-based diversification model, compared to the multi-species coalescent. And we also have found that if you compare the distribution of pairwise distances between gene trees in our model, in the model and in the data, our model fares way better, as you can see here. So each row is a different data set. Each column, so the first column is for multi-species coalescent in blue, and the second column is for our model. In gray, you see the distribution for the data set. And the problem that we have with the multi-species coalescent is that it overestimates the role of incomplete lineage sorting. All right, so I will, I think, stop here. We have a third model that I would have liked to talk to you about, which is a model of pulse molecular evolution. Really the analog to the punctuated equilibrium theory of Eldredge and Gould, which is applied to usually to phenotypes and here to genomes, with this idea that actually, let's say, I will just show you one, maybe one picture here. Our idea is that the molecular clock is more or less constant within orders, except for temporary accelerations of substitutions. Sorry. Due to concerted fixations occurring more often than in the neutral in the standard evolution of single population, resulting in cladogenetic spikes of substitutions where you have lots of substitutions that seemingly occur at the same time in the paleontological timescale. And what we have done is to come up with a model that allows for the spikes of substitutions and tries to infer in which, so that's here, in which at which times these spikes can occur. And so what you see here, I will be very quick, is all the here on this clade for two. So you have two phylogenies of I'm sorry, sorry, what's the name of the can't remember the name of, I'm sorry, the name of it's subclade of squamates, but I can't remember the name of the family here. I think it's Toxicofera. Yeah, Toxicofera. It's written here, and it's for 3 different loci. These are loci coding for snake venom proteins, and this is a locus which is known to be roughly clock-like. And we were glad to see that we didn't infer any spike of substitution, whereas here we infer lots of them. Okay, so I will stop here. Just we had 2 explanations for why spikes could occur, and one of them would be the introgression from close lineages. I will end with this picture showing here 2 introgression events, and the difference with these between these 2 introgression events being that these guys have sample descendants, whereas these guys don't have sample descendants. And so when you analyze your alignment in this clade, you can trace back the presence of this orange diversity in your sample because you have sampled this tip here, but the red material here present in this loci cannot be inferred. And so basically, this introgression event, which cannot be inferred, amounts to a jump in the genomic in the genome space, which is equivalent to 2 times this distance. Okay, because here, instead of progressively accumulating mutations, here you introgress genomes which are at a large distance from the genome which is here. Okay, and I will spare you the conclusions and show you just a slide with my collaborators, Hélène Morlon, Raphaël Etienne, Marc Manceau, who was a very talented PhD student who then did a postdoc in Tanya Stadler's lab, and François Bienvenu also, who is now at ETH, but in the math department. In the part 2, we've done the peripatric metapopulation thing with Shubhana, and I didn't show you this part, and the rest, the last two models were done with Julie Marin and Marc Manceau in collaboration with Guillaume Achaz, who is a member, actually co-head of my group, and of course Hélène Morlon. Here's the SMILE group. As Rui mentioned, we have, I'm part of the initiative Peer Community In, which is very successful in evolutionary biology, but I wanted to also point you to the new PCI that we founded 18 months ago, which is called PCI Mathematical and Computational Biology. I also want to remind you that we are in a climate emergency and encourage you to start and to let's say assemble green communities in your professional locations. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry if I've been too long.